Welcome to Milo's Dreamy Adventure, a gentle, magical bedtime story that floats between stars and cuddles, biscuits and moonlight. Snuggle up, pull the covers tight, and get ready to drift into a world where dogs can dream of flying, castles serve gravy streams, and every sleepy wag of Milo's tail leads to something wonderful. This is a cozy tale of imagination, friendship, and the quiet kind of joy that only happens just before you fall asleep. So breathe deep, close your eyes, and let's begin. Because the best adventures, they start with a yawn and a dream. Carrie bounced up the garden path, her overnight bag swinging at her side. The sun was warm, and the air was filled with the scent of daisies and something sweet, maybe jam tarts, maybe Nanny's famous shortbread. Milo trotted proudly beside her, tail wagging, nose twitching at every flower he passed. He paused to sniff a patch of mint, then sneezed dramatically before bounding ahead. "There's my Miss Molly!" Nanny Pat beamed from the doorstep, her arms already open. She wrapped Carrie in one of her big, squishy hugs, the kind that smelled of lavender and flower and home. Milo gave a happy bark and snuck into the hug too, nuzzling between them like he belonged. Because he did. "This house smells like biscuits," he thought with a little doggy sigh. "Good things always happen here." In the warm, cosy kitchen, Nanny Pat handed Carrie a big wooden spoon and raised an eyebrow with a smile. "Cookies or oatcakes today, Miss Molly?" "Cookies," Carrie grinned, already rolling up her sleeves. The next few minutes were a whirlwind of flour clouds and laughter. Eggs cracked, sugar poured, spoons clattered, and every now and then Carrie and Nanny Pat would bump hips and giggle like it was a baking dance. At the edge of the kitchen, Milo lay in his favourite corner, eyes locked on the mixing bowl with intense, unblinking focus. If I stare long enough, he thought, maybe the dough will fall. Just one little lump. A sprinkle of flour drifted through the air and landed square on his nose. He didn't flinch, he didn't blink. He just waited, patient, hopeful, heroic. The garden shimmered in the fading sunlight, each leaf and petal touched with gold. The air was warm and still, filled with the soft buzz of bees and the scent of something wonderful. Carrie led the way down the winding garden path, her fingers brushing gently against the plants as she passed. "That's lavender," she said proudly. "And that's rosemary. And that one. Wait, is that lemon thyme?" Nanny Pat nodded with a smile, watering can in hand, her slippers crunching on the gravel. "You've got a good nose, my girl." Milo padded behind them through the grass, his nose low, tail swishing happily. He stopped at every patch of green, snuffling each flower like it was a new discovery. "This is my favourite bit," he thought with a dreamy sigh. "Everything smells like summer and squirrel breath." They snuggled on the sofa, wrapped in a patchwork blanket that smelled faintly of old roses and clean laundry. Rain tapped gently against the window, and the room glowed with the soft light of a nearby lamp. Nanny Pat opened the old photo album, its leather cover creaking just a little. The pages inside were filled with yellowed corners, black and white smiles and stories waiting to be told. "That's your daddy when he was 7, she said, tapping the photo with a fond smile. "Cheeky as ever, even back then." Carrie leaned in close, eyes sparkling. "And who's that?" she asked, pointing at a woman in a floral dress, teacup delicately balanced in her hand. "That's Nanny Sampson, your great-grandmother," Nanny Pat said softly. "She looks kind," Carrie murmured. "She was," Nanny Pat nodded. "She always had a cup of tea in hand. That's where the tea brand came from, you know. Sampson's Pinch was her special blend." Milo, curled at their feet, lifted his head and squinted at the photo. "I've never met her," he thought, "but I think she'd have slipped me a scone under the table when no one was looking." Carrie reached for her tablet, the screen flickering to life with a soft glow. But before she could settle into it, Nanny Pat gave her one of those looks, the kind that was part serious, part sparkle. "No screens tonight, Miss Molly," she said, folding her arms with a gentle smile. "Otherwise, you'll end up dreaming in Wi-Fi codes and dancing emojis." Carrie giggled and powered it down, slipping it under the cushion beside her. All right, she said. "No digital dreams tonight." Milo, lounging nearby with his head on his paws, tilted his head and gave her a curious blink. She should dream about cheese instead, he thought, or belly rubs, or flying through clouds made of biscuits. He gave a quiet sigh, his tail thumping once against the floor, and drifted a little closer to Carrie's feet, just in case her next dream needed a co-pilot. Carrie stood at the bathroom sink, brushing her teeth in slow, sleepy circles. The mirror was misted from Nanny Pat's earlier bath, and the faint scent of lavender soap still hung in the air. She hummed a little tune, splashing cool water on her face, then patted it dry with a soft, well-worn towel. Outside the door, Milo lay sprawled across the hallway floor, his eyes half closed, ears relaxed, like a loyal, furry bodyguard on night duty. He listened to the swish of running water, the clink of the toothbrush in its holder, the soft shuffle of slippers. She does this every night, he thought, his tail giving one lazy thump, but tonight feels different. His nose twitched. The air was quiet, too quiet. Something was out there, something gentle, something magical. Like the world is holding its breath, he thought, and waiting for something to begin. Carrie climbed into bed, the sheets cool and crisp beneath her, the smell of fabric softener and old books wrapping around her like a hug. But in the corner of the room, the old boiler hummed its usual tune, a low, rattling murmur that never quite sounded the same twice. She pulled the covers up to her chin and stared at it. "I don't like that sound," she whispered, her voice small in the dark. Nanny Pat leaned over, tucking the blankets snug around her shoulders. "It's just the house breathing, love," she said softly, brushing Carrie's hair from her eyes. "Old houses like this one like to whisper now and then. It means it's settling in for the night, too." Carrie gave a tiny nod, but her eyes stayed on the boiler. That's when Milo hopped up onto the bed with a soft thump, circling twice before curling tightly beside her. He pressed against her leg, warm and solid, his head resting just near her arm. "I've got you, sweetie," he thought, his eyes already half closed. "No noisy machine is getting past me tonight." And with that, the hum of the boiler didn't seem quite so loud anymore. Carrie lay still, her head resting on the pillow, a hand gently curled in Milo's soft fur. His side rose and fell in a slow, sleepy rhythm, the perfect lullaby. The room was quiet now. Only the distant tick of the old clock downstairs and the soft hum of the boiler now faded into something gentle, almost musical. The corners of the room began to blur as if the walls were no longer sure where they ended. Up above, the ceiling shimmered. Tiny specks of light began to appear, one by one, like shy fireflies tiptoeing out of hiding. Stars. Carrie blinked slowly. Were they real? Were they always there? Or was this the very edge of a dream? Beside her, Milo opened one eye. He stared at the ceiling too, ears twitching slightly. Is the wallpaper moving, he thought? Are those sparkles calling us? He didn't move, not yet, but something was definitely happening, and they were right at the beginning of it. Carrie stood in the middle of Nanny Pat's kitchen, but it wasn't quite the same. The walls shimmered like they'd been painted with stardust, and the cupboards sparkled faintly, as if they were dusted with sugar and dreams. The kettle whistled softly, but instead of steam, tiny constellations floated up from the spout, twinkling gently before disappearing into the ceiling. Archie sat proudly beside the oven, his silver-grey beard extra fluffy in the glow. "Ah, Dreamworld," he said with a slow nod. "Smells of roast beef and mystery." Eddie was sprawled belly up on a cushion near the pantry, his tail thudding lazily. He rolled over with a yawn and squinted at Milo. "Where are we going this time?" he asked, his voice full of sleepy curiosity. Milo stood tall, chest out, eyes bright. "To Auntie Claire's," he barked, practically bouncing. "She gives the best cuddles," he paused dramatically, "and the crispiest chicken in the galaxy." Carrie giggled, the scent of rosemary and adventure filling her nose. She had no idea what was coming next, but with these three, it was going to be delicious. Claire's cottage stood at the edge of a sparkling forest, its windows glowing like lanterns and the roof twinkling with a dusting of dream snow. The front door was painted the softest shade of blue, and flower pots lined the steps, each bloom humming a quiet tune. It looked like a fairy tale, only shinier, like someone had sprinkled magic over every brick and beam. Just as they stepped onto the cobbled path, the front door burst open with a joyful creak, and out zoomed Hugo, a blur of fluffy energy, ears bouncing like springs and tongue flapping in the wind. "You're here?" he barked, skidding to a stop in front of Milo, then bouncing from paw to paw like the floor was made of marshmallows. Archie trotted up beside him, ever the gentleman. "We brought our appetites," he said with a sniff toward the open window, where the scent of roasted something drifted out like a warm blanket. Milo's nose lifted to the breeze, eyes dreamy, tail already wagging. "I hope she saved the leftovers," he thought. "Any leftovers. All leftovers. I'll even take the bits that fell on the floor." Claire's laughter floated from inside the kitchen, and just like that the door swung wider. Adventure, and maybe chicken, awaited. The meadow stretched out before them like a feast woven into a dream. But this wasn't any ordinary field. The grass shimmered like spun sugar, and instead of butterflies, floating plates bobbed gently through the air, each one carrying something delicious: steaming meatballs, swirly mash mountains, and puddings that wobbled like jelly on trampolines. Wagging sausages danced through the sky, twisting and twirling like happy ribbons. "Bite the bacon bubbles!" Eddie shouted, his fluffy tail spinning behind him as he launched into the air, snapping at a sizzling strip with pure joy. Milo didn't hesitate. He bounded forward and dove snout first into a floating pie. Apple and chicken by the smell of it. Pastry flew. Filling splattered. Milo's tail thumped like a drumbeat. Gravy flowed in gentle rivers between the buttercup hills, warm and rich and just thick enough to paddle through. Why doesn't the real world have gravy rivers? He wondered, his tongue lolling with delight. Dreams are so much better. Archie shook his head fondly from the edge of a floating lasagna raft. Honestly, he muttered, you'd think they'd never eaten before bedtime. At the edge of the meadow, under a tree dripping with glowing sugar plums, stood a cosy little stall, built entirely from cinnamon sticks, caramel drizzle, and a roof that looked suspiciously like baked puff pastry. The air around it smelled like warm kitchens and happy memories. Behind the counter, an owl with a flour-dusted apron flapped her wings with purpose, a rolling pin in one claw and a tray of dream buns in the other. Her round spectacles were perched on the edge of her beak, and she had that wise, no-nonsense air of someone who could bake in her sleep and still make it perfect. "One for you," she said, handing a warm golden bun to Milo. "And one for you," she added, nodding to Archie with a wink. "And, whoa! Someone's hungry!" She looked down to see Milo and Hugo sitting side by side, both already covered in crumbs, eyes wide, tails thumping, mouths suspiciously empty. Milo licked his lips in slow satisfaction. Hugo tried to look innocent, but his frosting-smeared nose gave him away. Between the two of them, they'd already devoured their buns, and most of Eddie's. Eddie looked down at his paw, blinking in confusion. "Wait, didn't I have?" "They shouldn't make them so soft and buttery if they didn't want me to," Milo reasoned, his tail wagging like a lazy metronome. "Really, it's their fault." The owl gave a long-suffering sigh and rolled her eyes fondly. "Dream dogs," she muttered, always 2 bites ahead of their manners. They wandered through a dream market, where the stalls stretched on forever and everything sparkled like it had just been dusted with starlight. Cheese floated overhead like balloons, bobbing gently on strings made of melted toffee. Every now and then one would drift too low, and a passing dog would leap up with a delighted snap. Nearby, strawberries sat in neat little baskets, but they weren't quiet, oh no. They giggled when picked, a tiny, ticklish sound that made Carrie snort with laughter as one wriggled right out of her hand. The air was thick with the scent of warm waffles, honeyed popcorn, and some kind of magical cinnamon cloud that followed them wherever they went. Milo trotted ahead, nose twitching madly, tail wagging at full speed. Then he stopped. There it was. In the middle of a glitter-dusted stall, surrounded by jelly bean apples and dancing marshmallows, a cake, shaped perfectly like a bone, frosted with swirls of cream and a drizzle of dream gravy. He froze. His eyes widened. His ears went still. Time slowed. "This," he thought, breathless, "this is who I am now." Archie padded up beside him and gave him a nudge. "Snap out of it, mate," he said dryly. "We've got 4 more stalls to hit before the custard carousel shuts." Milo blinked, dazed. He gave the cake one last longing look. Then he licked his lips and followed the gang deeper into dessert heaven. The castle rose ahead of them like a dream carved from starlight, its towers glowing gold against a sky full of winking moons and drifting clouds of sugar mist. Banners waved gently from the turrets, stitched with symbols of bones, paw prints, and teacups. They stepped through grand doors carved from caramelized oak into a vast moonlit hall where everything shimmered. From the silver chandeliers above to the polished floor that reflected their faces like a puddle of honey. A banquet table stretched as far as the eye could see, curved in a gentle spiral like a giant snail made entirely of snacks. Plates sparkled with dream food, roast chicken wrapped in pastry clouds, meatballs balanced on tiny towers of mashed potato, and pies that purred gently when you got too close. The dogs padded up to their places, each chair a cosy velvet cushion shaped perfectly for paws and tails. As soon as they were seated, the lights dimmed to a warm golden glow, and music began to play. Soft at first, harps, a violin, maybe a flute made of fudge, but then it swelled with magic, wrapping around them like a lullaby and a celebration all at once. Milo stared at the glistening trifle in front of him, its layers glowing with hints of jelly, cream, and something mysterious. He gave it a hopeful nudge with his nose. Please be beef-flavoured, he wished, his eyes full of longing and dignity. He took a bite. It actually was. He nearly cried. Tears of joy, tears of beef. Dreams really did come true. With bellies full and tails wagging in slow, sleepy rhythms, Milo, Archie and Eddie strolled side by side with Hugo, guiding him through the twinkling dream streets beneath a velvet sky. The stars above glimmered like sleepy eyes, and the crescent moon followed them home like a quiet guardian. Their paws padded softly across glowing cobblestones, each step sending out a gentle shimmer beneath their feet. The air was filled with the scent of roasted biscuits and night-blooming marshmallow flowers. Laughter still echoed behind them from the grand castle hall, drifting on the breeze like music that didn't want to end. Hugo waddled a little slower now, his fur fluffed up from excitement and a bit of custard. "I'll dream of this forever," he murmured, his eyes glassy with joy, his voice just above a whisper. Milo nuzzled his friend gently, his nose soft against Hugo's cheek. "Next time," he said with a sleepy grin, "we bring napkins." Archie chuckled under his breath. Eddie hiccuped and licked his own nose, and together, under the soft light of the dreaming moon, they walked their friend home. 4 dogs, 1 unforgettable night, and a promise to return. The dream began to fade like morning mist, softly and slowly, as the dogs followed the glowing trail back through the quiet night. The path shimmered gently beneath their paws, each step a little slower now, as if even the stars were sighing them home. Nanny Pat's house came into view, warm lights twinkling in the windows, the scent of home, of tea, biscuits and bedtime wrapping around them like a hug. Inside, everything was still, peaceful, waiting. Archie padded over to his usual spot by the old boiler, let out a contented grunt, and curled up like a furry comma. Eddie spun in a perfect sleepy circle, once, twice, 3 times, then flopped dramatically onto the rug with a deep sigh and a soft snore before his eyes even closed. Milo padded quietly through the room, his ears drooping, tail giving a slow wag. He found the space next to Carrie's legs under the blanket, still warm, still safe. He climbed in without a sound, turned once, then rested his chin gently on her leg. He gave a little huff, closed his eyes, and felt her fingers settle softly on his head. This part, he thought, as the last flickers of starlight faded behind his eyelids, this is my favourite. Milo twitched in his sleep, his back paw giving a sudden kick and his nose scrunching like he'd just caught a whiff of something strange. Then came the snort, soft and snuffly, followed by a series of high-pitched squeaky sounds that made Carrie smile in the half-darkness. He was dreaming, and by the look of it, probably about sausages or a squirrel on roller skates. Still half asleep, Carrie reached out from under her blanket and gently rubbed behind his ear, the spot that always made his back leg thump. "Shh, it's okay," she whispered, her voice warm and slow, like a lullaby just for him. Milo let out a long, wobbly sigh and the squeaks faded. The frantic twitching settled, his breathing softened. The dream wiggled away like fog in morning light, leaving behind only traces of magic and mystery. Was I flying again? He wondered drowsily, drifting deeper into warmth. Was Hugo really made of marshmallow? Because if he was, I definitely bit his ear. He tucked his nose under his paw and with one last tiny snort let the dreams carry him gently onward. Dream wagged, his tail drifting lazily behind him as he floated between the stars, a sleepy comet with a biscuit-filled belly and a heart full of joy. The sky around him pulsed with soft light, each star blinking like a wink from the universe. He spun gently through the air, paws paddling without urgency, as golden dust curled around him like a blanket stitched from bedtime stories. Bits of his dream bubbled up in his memory, the towering cake shaped like a bone, the floating market with its giggling strawberries, and the warm, magical castle where he'd nearly wept over a beef-flavoured trifle. And Hugo! Oh, Hugo! Zooming out the cottage door, ears flapping and bark wobbly with joy. Milo snorted softly in his sleep at the thought. Best night ever, he thought with a drowsy sigh, his tummy happily full, his tail as light as air. Around him a swirl of stardust began to gather, spinning gently until it formed a glowing dream bubble. Inside, little scenes shimmered to life. The bubbling gravy stream winding through Biscuit Hills, the jelly bean bush they'd all tumbled into laughing, and Archie pulling his serious face as he tried and failed to explain the science of floating cheese. Milo watched them with sleepy pride. This was his dream, his world, and it was perfect. He closed his eyes just a little more and thought, I hope Carrie's dreaming too. I hope we're dreaming together. Back in the real world, the farmhouse was still and quiet, wrapped in the hush that only comes just before dawn. Carrie stirred beneath her blanket, her head nestled deep in the pillow, hair tousled like wildflower petals. She let out a little sigh as the edge of sleep softened. Beside her, Milo lay curled in his usual spot, a warm, steady shape pressed gently against her legs. He let out a tiny snore, the kind that sounded like a cross between a sigh and a hiccup. Then his legs twitched. Once, twice, as if he were running through fields of stardust and pie. Carrie's hand, still half buried in the blanket, reached out sleepily. Her fingers found the top of his head and rested there, stroking gently through his fur. You're running in your dreams again, she mumbled with a sleepy smile, her voice so quiet it barely reached the room. Outside, moonlight tiptoed across the garden, spilling silver onto the grass, curling around flower pots and resting softly on the window pane. The stars above still shimmered faintly, as if they, too, were holding on to the last moments of a shared dream. In the quiet stillness of the room, Milo shifted gently under the blankets, his body warm and soft as he nestled in closer to Carrie. He let out a long, sleepy breath and curled tighter into himself, his nose tucking near his tail, his ears twitching once before settling. The old boiler in the corner gave one last hiss, a soft puff, like an old man exhaling after a long day, then finally fell silent, as if it too had decided to go to sleep. Carrie, still deep in that lovely space between dreaming and waking, rolled over without opening her eyes. Her arm found Milo's belly and settled there, fingers gently splayed across his fur. He gave a tiny grumble of contentment, and she sighed. At the very same moment, so did he. Two perfect sighs, in perfect harmony. Outside, the wind rustled the hedges. A bird fluttered in its sleep. But inside the room, wrapped in blankets, held in moonlight, and surrounded by the hush of home, all was calm, all was well. The first golden threads of morning sunlight peeked through the curtains, spilling softly across the bedroom floor like warm honey. Dust motes danced in the light, drifting lazily as the world began to wake. Carrie blinked, her lashes fluttering in the glow. She gave a long, delicious stretch under the blanket, her toes curling, arms reaching, until the last bits of sleep melted from her limbs. She rolled onto her side and looked at Milo. He was still deep in his dreams, curled into a loose comma at the edge of the bed, his fur warm and gently rumpled. One paw twitched in the air, a little kick, like he was chasing something soft and important just beyond the edge of his dream. Carrie smiled. She reached out slowly and brushed her fingers behind his floppy ear, then leaned down close, her voice barely more than a whisper. Thank you for last night. For the stars. For the laughter. For the magic only a dream could hold. Milo didn't open his eyes, but one tail thump answered her softly, the kind of tail wag that meant everything. And then, just for a moment, he opened one eye, just a sliver, and smiled with it. The kind of smile only a dog can give, pure, wordless, and full of love. The soft creak of the door was the first sign, followed by the gentle clink of china. Nanny Pat appeared in the doorway, a tray balanced perfectly in her hands, 2 mugs of warm tea, a jug of milk, and a plate stacked with toast, golden and buttery at the edges. The morning sunlight caught her glasses, and she gave Carrie a familiar wink. Her cardigan, as always, had biscuit crumbs on it, a sure sign she'd already sampled breakfast herself. "Well, Miss Molly," she said with a grin, "did our brave little explorer have big dreams?" Carrie pushed herself up on one elbow, yawning into a smile as she glanced at Milo, still snoozing beside her like a dog who'd crossed galaxies. She nodded, her eyes twinkling. He flew through the stars, met a sausage that could sing, and helped a cockapoo find the world's best biscuit. Nanny Pat let out a warm chuckle, setting the tray down on the windowsill where the light made the jam sparkle. Well, she said, hands on her hips, sounds like Milo had just the right kind of night. Full belly, full heart, and a head full of stars. Milo stirred at the sound of her voice, stretched with a tiny grunt, and rolled onto his back, paws in the air. And just like that, everything was right in the world. 1. Thank you so much for joining us on Milo's Dreamy Adventure. We hope it brought a little magic to your night and a smile to your heart. From me, Dreamy Adventure, and everyone here at Book at Bed, we're sending you warm wishes, cozy dreams, and the softest kind of good night. Until next time, sleep well, dream big, and remember, the best adventures often begin in your dreams. Good night.